Right now there are people with your exact same anxiety profile using it to fuel extraordinary things. Careers, creative work, relationships, impact, and there are others, maybe you've been one of them, spending that same energy in the war against it, trying to be calmer, quieter, less sensitive, less anxious, losing a fight that was never meant to be fought. The difference between those two groups isn't brain chemistry, it's a piece of understanding that changes the entire relationship. And you can have it in the next few minutes. Stop fighting your wiring, start using it, hit like, subscribe, and share this. This understanding should be in every anxious person's hands. Chapter 1: The Secret Edge Hiding in Your Anxiety. Most people spend their entire lives trying to get rid of anxiety. They treat it like a flaw, a weakness, something broken inside them that needs to be fixed. But what if that assumption is completely wrong? What if the very thing you've been fighting is actually the reason you're capable of outperforming everyone else? Anxiety is not the enemy. Misunderstood anxiety is. Think about the moments when your heart starts racing before something important, a big meeting, a job interview, a presentation. Your mind speeds up, your senses sharpen, your awareness increases. Most people interpret that as a problem, but biologically that is your body preparing you for peak performance. It is your system saying this matters, pay attention. The difference between someone who collapses under anxiety and someone who thrives because of it comes down to one thing: interpretation. Two people walk into the same situation, both feel anxious. One thinks, I'm nervous, I'm going to mess this up. The other thinks, I'm activated, I'm ready. Same feeling, completely different outcome. High performers don't eliminate anxiety, they convert it. Look at some of the most successful people in high-pressure environments. Athletes before a championship game, entrepreneurs before a major pitch, performers before stepping onto a stage, they all feel it. The difference is they've trained themselves not to run from it but to use it. Anxiety is energy. And energy, when directed properly, becomes focus. But here's where most people go wrong. They try to calm down when they should be gearing up. They try to suppress the feeling instead of channeling it. That's like trying to shut off an engine that's already warmed up and ready to go. Instead, what if you leaned into it? Imagine your anxiety as a spotlight. Wherever it points, that's where your attention goes. That's why anxious people often overthink. Their spotlight is intense. It scans everything. It notices risks, patterns, details others miss. In the wrong context, that becomes paralysis. In the right context, that becomes precision. That's your first shift. Anxiety is not chaos. It's heightened awareness without direction. Give it direction and it becomes your greatest advantage. Consider someone preparing for a high-stakes presentation. An anxious person might rehearse more, anticipate questions, refine details, and prepare for every scenario. Someone without that same level of concern might just wing it. Who performs better when it actually counts? The anxious person, if they don't let fear shut them down. That's the key. Anxiety doesn't ruin performance. Mismanagement of anxiety does. You've probably experienced this yourself. Times when you were nervous but you showed up anyway, and afterward you realized you performed better than expected. Sharper, more alert, more present. That wasn't in spite of your anxiety. That was because of it. Now imagine if you could access that state intentionally. The truth is, your brain doesn't distinguish between excitement and anxiety as clearly as you think. Both states elevate your heart rate, both increase alertness. The difference lies in the story you attach to the sensation. When you say "I'm anxious," your brain looks for reasons to justify fear. When you say "I'm ready," your brain looks for ways to perform. Same signal, different command. This is not about lying to yourself, it's about training your interpretation. You're not changing the feeling, you're changing what it means. And that shift alone can transform how you show up in every area of your life. Think about the people who achieve extraordinary results. They don't wait until they feel calm. They act while feeling everything. They've built a relationship with discomfort that most people avoid. They've stopped asking "how do I get rid of this?" and started asking "how do I use this?" Because here's the reality. The moments that trigger your anxiety are usually the moments that matter most. Growth doesn't live in comfort. It lives in uncertainty, risk, and exposure. Exactly the situations that activate your anxious response. So if you eliminate anxiety, you don't just eliminate discomfort, you eliminate opportunity. That's why anxious people, when they understand this, often outperform everyone else. They are constantly being pushed toward preparation, awareness, and improvement. Their system refuses to let them coast. The problem isn't that you feel too much. The problem is that you haven't been taught what to do with what you feel. Let's break it down practically. When anxiety shows up, your first instinct is to avoid, delay, escape. But avoidance teaches your brain that the situation is dangerous, and the next time the anxiety gets stronger, instead you need to do the opposite. You need to move toward the discomfort with control, not recklessly, not blindly, but deliberately. Start small. When you feel that surge, don't shut down. Take one action, just one. Send the email, start the first sentence, make the call, step into the situation. Action interrupts anxiety, and over time your brain starts associating that feeling not with fear but with movement. That's how you rewire the pattern. Another critical shift is understanding that perfection is not the goal. Anxious people often aim for perfection because they want certainty. They believe that if everything is perfect, nothing can go wrong. But perfection is a trap. It slows you down, it increases pressure. It makes every action feel heavier. High performers with anxiety don't aim for perfection, they aim for progress under pressure. They accept that things might not go exactly as planned, and they trust themselves to handle it anyway. That trust is built through repetition, through showing up again and again while feeling uncomfortable. Confidence is not the absence of anxiety. It is the evidence that you can function despite it. And every time you act while anxious, you collect that evidence. If this audiobook is bringing you value so far, take a moment to like it, share it with someone who needs to hear this, leave a comment with your biggest takeaway, and subscribe to Prime Audiobooks for more content like this. Now let's continue. There's another advantage anxious people have that is rarely talked about: sensitivity to consequences. They think ahead, they consider outcomes. They prepare for what could go wrong. And while others might overlook risks, anxious individuals often see them clearly. Again, unmanaged, this becomes overthinking. Managed properly, it becomes strategic thinking. The goal is not to stop thinking, it's to structure your thinking. Instead of letting your mind spiral endlessly, give it a framework. Ask yourself, what's the worst that could realistically happen? What would I do if it did? And what's the most likely outcome? This pulls your thinking out of chaos and into clarity. Most fears lose their power when you face them directly. And when you realize that you can handle more than you thought, your relationship with anxiety begins to change. You stop seeing it as a threat. You start seeing it as a signal that you're stepping into something meaningful, a signal that you're pushing your limits, a signal that you're growing. That's the reframe that changes everything. Because the truth is, the people who feel nothing rarely achieve anything extraordinary. It's the ones who feel deeply, who care intensely, who push themselves despite the noise in their head that create real impact. You don't need to become a different person. You don't need to eliminate your anxiety. You need to learn how to lead it. And that begins with a simple decision. The next time you feel that familiar tension, that tightening in your chest, that racing in your mind, don't ask, how do I make this stop? Ask, what is this trying to prepare me for? And then step into it, because on the other side of that feeling is not failure, it's performance, it's growth, it's proof. And as you move forward, consider this quietly. What if the very thing you've been trying to escape is actually your greatest advantage? What would change if you stopped fighting your anxiety and started training it? Where in your life have you been holding back, not because you're incapable, but because you've misunderstood what you're feeling? Chapter 2: Why Your Mind Moves Faster Than Others. You've already seen that anxiety is not the enemy, but a form of energy waiting for direction. You've begun to understand that the same feeling that once held you back can actually sharpen your performance when you interpret it differently. Now it's time to go deeper, because there's a reason your mind moves the way it does. And once you understand it, you stop feeling out of control and start realizing you've been operating with a hidden advantage all along. An anxious mind is a fast mind. It doesn't sit still. It doesn't drift casually from thought to thought. It scans, predicts, analyzes, and questions. While others are comfortable with uncertainty, your brain tries to map it. While others react in the moment, your mind is already 10 steps ahead, running simulations of what could happen next. Most people call this overthinking, but that label is incomplete, because the truth is your brain isn't broken. It's overactive without structure. Think of it like a high-performance engine. If you drop that engine into a weak frame with no steering, it becomes dangerous. Too much power, no control. But put that same engine into a well-built system and suddenly it becomes unstoppable. That's your mind. Right now it might feel like it's working against you, thoughts racing at night, replaying conversations, imagining worst-case scenarios. But that same mental speed, when trained, becomes your ability to anticipate problems before they happen, to prepare more thoroughly than others, and to adapt faster under pressure. The difference is not in how fast your mind works, it's in how well you guide it. Let's break this down in a real-world context. Imagine two professionals preparing for an important job interview. One reviews the basics, feels confident, and shows up. The other, the anxious thinker, goes deeper. They research the company, study potential questions, rehearse answers, think through different scenarios, and mentally prepare for unexpected turns. Now, without control, that second person might spiral. They might second-guess every answer, lose confidence, and walk in overwhelmed. But with structure, that same preparation becomes dominance. They walk in ready, adaptable, and aware of nuances the other candidate completely missed. That's the edge. Anxious individuals are often better prepared. Not because they want to be, but because their mind doesn't let them ignore possibilities. But here's the problem. Preparation without boundaries turns into exhaustion. That's where most people get stuck. They don't know when to stop thinking. So the goal is not to slow your mind down. The goal is to create limits around when and how you think. You don't need less thinking. You need intentional thinking. To start by assigning your mind a job instead of letting it run freely. When a concern shows up, don't let it expand endlessly. Contain it. Ask specific questions. What exactly am I worried about? Is it realistic? What action can I take right now? If there's an action, take it. If there's no action, release it. This sounds simple, but it requires discipline because your brain will try to reopen the loop. It will say, but what if, again and again. That's where you step in. You are not your thoughts, you are the one directing them, and once you take that role seriously, everything changes. Another powerful shift is learning how to separate useful thinking from useless thinking. Useful thinking leads to action. It creates clarity. It results in preparation or decision making. Useless thinking leads to repetition. It loops without resolution. It drains energy without producing anything. An anxious mind naturally leans toward repetition. It wants certainty, and when it can't find it, it keeps searching. But certainty is not always available. So instead of chasing certainty, you train your mind to accept readiness. Readiness means you've done what you can, you've prepared to a reasonable level, and now you move forward. This is where high performers separate themselves, not by eliminating doubt but by acting despite it. Think about elite athletes before a game. Do you think their minds are quiet? No. Their minds are active, focused, alert, but not scattered. They've trained their thoughts to stay within the boundaries of performance. That's exactly what you need to do, and it starts with controlling your input. What you consume shapes how your mind operates. If you constantly expose yourself to noise, negativity, and distraction, your mind becomes more chaotic. It has more material to work with, more scenarios to analyze, more things to worry about. But if you feed it clarity, structure, and focus, it begins to reflect that. Limit the unnecessary. Reduce the constant scrolling, the endless comparison, the overload of information that serves no purpose. Your mind is already fast. It doesn't need more fuel. It needs better fuel. There's also something else you need to understand about your thinking pattern. You are highly sensitive to potential mistakes. That's not a weakness, that's quality control. In environments where precision matters, where details make the difference, where small errors can lead to big consequences, this trait becomes incredibly valuable. But only if you don't let it turn into fear, because there's a fine line between being detail-oriented and being paralyzed. The way you stay on the right side of that line is by setting standards, not expectations. Standards guide your actions. Expectations judge your results. Focus on doing things well, not perfectly. A focus on showing up prepared, not flawless. And when something doesn't go as planned, you don't collapse, you adjust. That adaptability is what turns mental speed into real performance. If this audiobook is bringing you value so far, take a moment to like it, share it with someone who needs to hear this, leave a comment with your biggest takeaway, and subscribe to Prime Audiobooks for more content like this. Now let's continue. There's a concept you need to internalize deeply. Your thoughts are tools, not truths. Just because your mind generates a scenario doesn't mean it's real. Just because it imagines a failure doesn't mean it will happen. Your brain's job is to explore possibilities. Your job is to decide which ones matter. That separation gives you power. Without it, you react to every thought as if it's a fact. With it, you choose your response. This is where discipline comes in again, not physical discipline, but mental discipline. The ability to notice a thought and not immediately follow it. The ability to pause and redirect. The ability to say this is not useful right now. At first this will feel unnatural. Your mind is used to running freely. But over time it begins to adapt because the brain learns from repetition. Every time you redirect your thinking, you strengthen control. Every time you let it spiral, you reinforce chaos. So the question becomes simple: what are you practicing? Because whether you realize it or not, you are training your mind every day. You're either training it to focus or to scatter, to act or to hesitate, to lead or to follow. And the good news is it's never fixed. You can start shifting it right now. Another strategy that high-performing anxious individuals use is externalizing their thoughts. Instead of keeping everything in their head, they write it down. They organize it. They bring it out into the open where it can be seen clearly. Because thoughts inside your head feel bigger than they actually are. When you put them on paper, they become manageable. You can evaluate them, challenge them, refine them, and most importantly, you can close them. That's something anxious minds struggle with: closure. So you create it manually. You decide when a thought has served its purpose. You decide when it's time to move on. And that decision gives you back your energy, because mental energy is finite. And if you waste it on endless loops, you have less available when it actually matters. But when you conserve it, direct it, and apply it strategically, you become incredibly effective. You start showing up with clarity. You start making decisions faster. You start performing at a level that feels different, not because your anxiety disappeared, but because you finally learned how to control the speed of your mind. And as you move forward, consider this. What if your fast thinking is not something to slow down, but something to refine? Where in your life are you letting your thoughts run without direction? And what would change if you started giving your mind a clear role instead of letting it take over everything? Chapter 3: Turning Pressure into Precision. By now you've started to see your anxiety differently. What once felt like a liability has begun to reveal itself as energy, awareness, and speed that can be directed. You've recognized that your mind isn't the problem, it's the lack of structure around it. And now the next step is learning how to take that internal pressure and convert it into something even more powerful. Precision. Pressure is unavoidable. Whether it's a deadline at work, a high-stakes conversation, a financial decision, or a moment where all eyes are on you, life will continue to present situations where the outcome matters. And in those moments, anxious individuals often feel the intensity more than others. But here's the shift most people never make. Pressure is not something that crushes you. It's something that reveals how well you're trained. Think about a professional athlete stepping into a championship game. The pressure is enormous. Millions of people watching. Years of work on the line. That pressure doesn't suddenly appear in that moment. It was always there, building, shaping, preparing them. The game simply exposes whether they've learned how to handle it. Your life works the same way. When pressure hits, you don't rise to the occasion. You fall to the level of your preparation. And this is where anxious individuals have a hidden advantage. because they already feel the pressure before the moment arrives. They anticipate it, they simulate it, they experience it mentally long before it becomes real. That means you have more opportunities to prepare. But again, without control, this turns into stress. With control, it becomes rehearsal. Instead of letting your mind run wild with worst-case scenarios, you turn those scenarios into structured preparation. You ask yourself, if this situation happens, how will I respond? You visualize not just the problem but your response to it. That's the difference. Most people imagine failure and stop there. High performers imagine challenges and then mentally rehearse overcoming them. This is how you build confidence before the moment arrives. Confidence is not built by hoping things go well. It's built by knowing you've prepared for when they don't. Now let's talk about execution under pressure. One of the biggest mistakes anxious individuals make is trying to do everything at once when the pressure hits. Their mind speeds up and they try to match that speed with action. They rush, they overcorrect, and they lose precision. But precision doesn't come from speed. It comes from focus. When the pressure rises, your world needs to get smaller, not bigger. You don't think about everything. You think about the next step, just one. That's how elite performers operate. In high-pressure moments, they narrow their focus to the immediate action in front of them, the next move, the next word, the next decision. They don't let their mind jump ahead, because jumping ahead creates overwhelm. Staying present creates control. This is something you can train. The next time you feel overwhelmed, don't try to solve everything. Break it down. What is the next actionable step? Not the entire outcome, just the next move, then take it, and then the next. This approach does something powerful. It interrupts the cycle of overthinking and replaces it with progress. Because action, even small action, creates momentum, and momentum reduces anxiety. Another critical piece of performing under pressure is your relationship with mistakes. Anxious individuals often fear mistakes more than others. They want to avoid them at all costs, but this creates tension, and tension reduces performance. The truth is, mistakes are not what ruin performance. Fear of mistakes does. When you're focused on avoiding errors, your attention is split. Part of you is trying to perform, and part of you is trying not to fail. That division weakens you. Instead, shift your focus entirely to execution. Let mistakes happen if they happen. And trust your ability to recover, because recovery is far more important than perfection. In fact, the people who perform best under pressure are not the ones who never make mistakes. They are the ones who recover the fastest. They don't dwell, they don't spiral, they adjust, and then they move forward. That adaptability is what you need to build. It comes from practice, from putting yourself in situations where the outcome matters and learning to stay composed within them. Start small. Put yourself in controlled environments where there is some level of pressure. It could be speaking up in a meeting, taking on a challenging project, or stepping into a situation you would normally avoid. Each time you do this, you're training your nervous system. You're teaching it that pressure is not something to escape but something to operate within. If this audiobook is bringing you value so far, take a moment to like it. Share it with someone who needs to hear this. Leave a comment with your biggest takeaway, and subscribe to Prime Audiobooks for more content like this. Now let's continue. There's another layer to this that most people overlook: physical control. Your body and your mind are not separate. When your anxiety rises, your body responds, your breathing changes, your posture shifts, your muscles tighten. If you ignore this, your mind becomes harder to control. But if you manage your body, you influence your mind. Start with your breathing. Slow it down, not dramatically, not in a forced way, just enough to create space. A controlled breath signals safety to your system. It tells your body that you are not in danger, and that alone can reduce the intensity of the moment. Then adjust your posture. Stand or sit in a way that reflects control. Shoulders back, head up, stable. These small physical shifts send signals back to your brain. They reinforce the idea that you are in command. This is not about pretending. It's about aligning your physical state with the performance you want to deliver, because when your body is steady, your mind follows. Another strategy is creating pre-performance routines. Before any high-pressure situation, have a consistent way of preparing yourself. It could be reviewing key points, taking a few controlled breaths, or repeating a simple phrase that centers you. This routine becomes an anchor. It tells your brain, we've been here before. We know what to do. And that familiarity reduces uncertainty. Over time, this routine becomes automatic. And when it does, you don't waste energy figuring out how to handle the moment. You just step into it. This is how you turn pressure into precision, not by eliminating the feeling, but by building systems around it. Systems that guide your thinking, systems that control your actions, systems that stabilize your body. And when all of that comes together, something powerful happens. You stop fearing pressure. You start respecting it, because you know that within that pressure is your opportunity to perform at your highest level. And as you continue forward, think about this. Where in your life are you allowing pressure to overwhelm you instead of training for it? What would change if you treated every high-stakes moment as a chance to refine your precision? And how would your performance shift if you focused less on avoiding mistakes and more on executing the next step with clarity? Chapter 4: The Discipline That Turns Chaos into Control. You've seen how your anxiety can become energy, how your fast mind can be structured, and how pressure can sharpen you instead of breaking you. You're no longer looking at your internal experience as something random or uncontrollable. Now it becomes about consistency, because none of this works if it only happens once in a while. The real transformation begins when you build discipline around your mental and emotional patterns. A discipline is often misunderstood. Most people think it's about forcing yourself to do things you don't want to do. But for someone with an anxious mind, discipline is something far more specific. It is the ability to stay directed when your thoughts try to pull you in every direction at once. Your biggest challenge is not laziness, it's fragmentation. Too many thoughts, too many possibilities, too many internal signals competing for your attention. And without discipline, you react to all of them. You start something, then second-guess it. You move forward, then hesitate. You make progress, then stop to analyze whether it was the right move. That constant switching drains you. So discipline for you starts with one core principle: finish what you start, even when your mind wants to change direction. Not forever, not blindly, but long enough to create momentum, because momentum is the antidote to mental chaos. When you stay with one task, one direction, one decision, your mind gradually quiets down, not because it stops producing thoughts, but because it begins to align with your actions. Action creates clarity. Without action, everything stays theoretical. And theory is where anxiety thrives. It feeds on what if. It expands in uncertainty. But when you act, you replace what if with what is. That shift grounds you. This is why disciplined execution matters more for you than it does for most people. It's not just about productivity, it's about stability. Now let's talk about consistency. Anxious individuals often operate in extremes. Highly motivated one day, completely drained the next, focused for a period, then scattered. This inconsistency creates frustration because it feels like you're capable of more but you can't access it reliably. The solution is not to wait for the perfect mental state. The solution is to build systems that work regardless of how you feel. You don't need to feel ready. You need to have a structure that guides you when you're not. Start by defining non-negotiables, simple, repeatable actions that you commit to no matter what. It could be working on a task for a set amount of time, reviewing your priorities each morning, or completing one meaningful action before you allow yourself to get distracted. These are not big dramatic changes, they are small consistent anchors, and over time they create a sense of control that anxiety cannot easily disrupt. Because now, even on days when your mind feels chaotic, you still move forward. That's what builds confidence, not perfect days, but consistent ones. Another key aspect of discipline is learning how to manage your environment. Your environment either supports your focus or destroys it. And for an anxious mind, distractions are not neutral, they are triggers. Every notification, every unnecessary input, every interruption, they give your mind something new to process, something new to think about, something new to worry about. So if you want control, you have to reduce the noise, create spaces where you can work without constant interruption. Limit what you expose yourself to during critical moments. Protect your attention like it matters, because it does. This is not about isolation, it's about intentional exposure. You decide what gets your focus, because if you don't decide, everything will compete for it. There's also something deeper you need to understand. Discipline is not rigid, it is adaptive. Many anxious individuals struggle because they try to create perfect systems. They want the ideal routine, the perfect plan, the flawless structure. But when reality doesn't match that plan, they feel like they've failed, and then they stop. But real discipline adjusts. It doesn't break when things change, it adapts and continues. If your day doesn't go as planned, you don't abandon everything. You adjust and keep moving. That flexibility is what keeps you consistent, because life will never be perfectly controlled. And if your discipline depends on perfect conditions, it will always fail. But if your discipline is based on commitment, it survives any condition. If this audiobook is bringing you value so far, take a moment to like it, share it with someone who needs to hear this, leave a comment with your biggest takeaway, and subscribe to Prime Audiobooks for more content like this. Now let's continue. Let's go deeper into mental discipline. Your thoughts will not stop. That's not the goal. The goal is to decide which thoughts deserve your attention. Right now, your mind might treat every thought as equally important. A random worry feels just as urgent as a real priority. A hypothetical scenario feels just as significant as an actual task. This is where discipline changes everything. You start categorizing your thoughts. Is this useful right now? If yes, act on it or plan it. If no, let it pass. This sounds simple, but it requires repetition because your brain will resist. It will try to pull you back into old patterns. It will tell you that every thought needs to be explored. It doesn't. Most thoughts are just noise, and the more you practice ignoring that noise, the stronger your focus becomes. Another powerful habit is setting clear endpoints. Anxious minds struggle with open loops, tasks that feel unfinished, decisions that feel unresolved, conversations that replay without closure. So you create closure intentionally. When you complete a task, define it as done. When you make a decision, commit to it. When you reflect on something, give yourself a limit. This prevents your mind from constantly reopening the same loop, because every open loop consumes energy. And when you close them, you free that energy for something more important. There's also a level of self-trust that comes from discipline. Right now you might doubt yourself, not because you're incapable, but because your actions have been inconsistent. Sometimes you follow through, sometimes you don't. That inconsistency creates uncertainty. But when you become disciplined, when you show up repeatedly, when you do what you said you would do, something shifts. You start trusting yourself, and that trust reduces anxiety. Because now when a challenge appears, you don't question whether you can handle it. You know you'll show up, and that certainty changes how you approach everything. Finally, understand this. Discipline is not about becoming someone else. It's about becoming reliable to yourself. It's about knowing that no matter how your mind feels, you have the ability to direct your actions. And that is where real control comes from, not from eliminating thoughts, not from avoiding discomfort, but from consistently choosing your response. As you continue to build this, consider this carefully. Where in your life are you letting your thoughts dictate your actions instead of the other way around? What small, consistent behaviors could you commit to that would create stability in your day? And how would your confidence change if you knew without question that you could rely on yourself no matter what your mind was doing? Chapter 5: The Identity Shift That Changes Everything. Up to this point, you've learned how to reinterpret anxiety as energy structure, your fast-moving mind perform under pressure, and build discipline that keeps you steady. You've started shifting from reacting to your internal world to directing it. But there's one final barrier that determines whether all of this sticks or slowly fades away. And that barrier is identity. Because no matter how many techniques you learn, you will always fall back to the person you believe you are. If you see yourself as an anxious person who struggles, then every moment of doubt, hesitation, or overthinking reinforces that story. Even when you perform well, you might dismiss it as luck or temporary. And when things go wrong, it feels like proof that nothing has changed. But if you begin to see yourself differently, everything starts to align. Identity is not just a label, it is a filter. It determines how you interpret your thoughts, your actions, and your results. Right now, you may still be carrying an old identity, one that says you're someone who gets overwhelmed, someone who overthinks, someone who needs to fix themselves before they can truly perform. That identity is outdated. Because based on everything you've seen so far, you are not someone who needs to be fixed. You are someone who needs to be directed. This is where the shift begins. You stop identifying as someone controlled by anxiety, and you start identifying as someone who uses intensity as an advantage. That may feel unnatural at first. Your mind will resist it. It will bring up past experiences, moments where you struggled, times where you didn't perform the way you wanted. But identity is not built from isolated moments, it's built from patterns, and you are in the process of creating new patterns. Every time you act despite discomfort, every time you structure your thinking, every time you follow through when it would be easier not to, you are reinforcing a new version of yourself. The key is to recognize those moments. Most people ignore their progress. They focus only on what's not working. They overlook the small wins that are actually shaping their identity. But if you want to change how you see yourself, you need to collect evidence. Not in a dramatic way, not by waiting for big achievements, but by noticing the small, consistent actions that prove you are different. You spoke up when it felt uncomfortable. You completed something you would have avoided before. You stayed focused when your mind tried to pull you away. These moments matter. They are the foundation of your new identity. And the more you acknowledge them, the stronger that identity becomes. Now let's go deeper. Anxious individuals often tie their identity to outcomes. If things go well, they feel capable. If things go poorly, they feel inadequate. This creates instability, because outcomes are not fully in your control, but identity based on process is stable. Instead of defining yourself by results, define yourself by behavior. You are someone who shows up. You are someone who prepares. You are someone who acts even when it's uncomfortable. These are things you can control. And when your identity is rooted in what you control, it becomes much harder to shake. This also changes how you respond to failure. Failure is no longer a reflection of who you are. It's feedback on what you did. That separation is critical, because without it, every mistake feels personal. And when things feel personal, your anxiety increases. But when you separate identity from outcome, you create space. You can analyze what happened without attacking yourself. You can adjust without losing confidence. This is how growth becomes sustainable. Another important shift is how you view discomfort. Right now, you might still associate discomfort with something negative, something to avoid, something that signals you're not ready. But high performers see it differently. They see discomfort as confirmation that they're pushing themselves, a confirmation that they're stepping into something meaningful, confirmation that they're expanding their capacity. So instead of asking, "Why do I feel this way?" they ask, "What does this allow me to do?" That question redirects your focus. It moves you from resistance to utilization, and over time, discomfort stops feeling like a barrier. It starts feeling like a signal that you're on the right path. If this audiobook is bringing you value so far, take a moment to like it. Share it with someone who needs to hear this. Leave a comment with your biggest takeaway, and subscribe to Prime Audiobooks for more content like this. Now let's continue. Let's talk about self-talk. The way you speak to yourself matters more than you realize. An anxious mind already generates a high volume of thoughts. If those thoughts are consistently negative, critical, or doubtful, they shape how you see yourself. But here's the important part. You don't need to eliminate negative thoughts. You need to stop agreeing with them. There's a difference. A thought appears, "You're not ready." That's automatic. Agreement is optional. Instead of accepting it, you challenge it. You respond with evidence. "I've prepared. I've handled similar situations before. I can figure this out." This is not blind positivity. It's grounded confidence. It's based on the patterns you're building. And the more you practice this, the more your internal dialogue shifts from reactive to intentional, from critical to constructive. This strengthens your identity because now you're not just acting differently, you're thinking differently about yourself. Another layer to this is how you handle comparison. In a world where you constantly see what others are doing, it's easy to feel like you're behind, like others are more confident, more capable, more composed. But what you don't see is their internal experience. You don't see their doubts, their struggles, their pressure. You only see their output. So comparing your internal state to someone else's external performance will always make you feel like you're lacking. Instead, bring your focus back to your own process, your own progress, your own standards, because that's where your control is and that's where your growth happens. As your identity strengthens, something subtle but powerful begins to shift. You stop asking, "Can I handle this?" and you start saying, "I'll handle this." That certainty doesn't come from knowing everything will go perfectly. It comes from trusting your ability to respond. And that trust is built through everything you've been doing, directing your energy, structuring your thoughts, performing under pressure, building discipline. These are not separate ideas, they are pieces of the same system, a system that transforms how you operate. And at the center of that system is who you believe you are. So as you move forward, consider this carefully. What identity have you been holding onto that no longer serves you? What evidence already exists that you are more capable than you give yourself credit for? And how would your decisions change if you fully accepted that your anxiety is not a limitation, but a defining part of your strength? Chapter 6: Becoming Unstoppable Under Pressure. You've reframed anxiety as energy, trained your fast mind to work with structure, learned to perform under pressure, built discipline that stabilizes your actions, and reshaped your identity into someone who uses intensity as an advantage. You are no longer reacting to your internal state. You are directing it. Now everything comes together in one final shift. The point where this stops being something you practice occasionally and becomes who you are every single day. Because the goal was never to manage anxiety. The goal was to become someone who performs regardless of it. There is a difference between knowing something and embodying it. Knowing stays in your head. Embodying shows up in your actions, especially when things get difficult. And the only way to fully embody what you've learned is to make it your default under pressure. Pressure is the final test, not the calm moments, not the easy wins, not the days when everything aligns. It's the moments when your heart rate rises, your thoughts accelerate, and the stakes feel real. That's where your training either shows up or disappears. And from this point forward, you make a decision. You don't wait to feel ready. You don't wait for your mind to quiet down. You don't wait for perfect conditions. You move anyway, because that is who you are now. Someone who acts in motion, not in hesitation. This is what separates people who stay stuck from people who break through. It's not talent, it's not luck, it's not even confidence in the traditional sense. It's commitment to action under uncertainty. You've already proven to yourself that you can think differently, structure differently, and respond differently. Now it becomes about consistency at a higher level, not just in controlled situations, but in real life, when the email matters, when the decision has consequences, when the opportunity feels bigger than you. Those are the moments where everything you've built either activates or fades, so you simplify it. You don't overanalyze the situation. You don't go back to old patterns. You return to what you know works. Focus on the next step. Control your breathing. Execute with clarity. Adjust if needed. Move forward. This becomes your operating system. And over time, something powerful happens. The same situations that once triggered hesitation now trigger focus. The same pressure that once overwhelmed you now sharpens you. The same anxiety that once held you back now pushes you forward. That is transformation, not because the feeling disappeared, but because your response changed permanently. Now let's talk about resilience. Even with everything you've learned, there will still be moments where you slip, moments where your mind races, where you hesitate, where you don't perform the way you wanted. That does not mean you've failed. It means you're human. The difference now is how quickly you recover. You don't spiral. You don't question everything. You don't go back to the old identity. You reset. Immediately, you ask what's the next move, and you take it. This ability to reset quickly is what makes you unstoppable, because progress is not about being perfect. It's about not staying down. Every time you recover faster, you strengthen your system. Every time you refuse to dwell, you protect your momentum. Every time you move forward despite imperfection, you reinforce who you've become. And that compounds, day after day, decision after decision, until it becomes automatic. Another important piece of this final stage is ownership, complete ownership. No more blaming circumstances, no more blaming your past, no more blaming your anxiety. You take responsibility for your response in every situation. That doesn't mean everything is your fault. It means everything is your responsibility. And that level of ownership gives you control. Because if your response is always yours, then your progress is always within reach. This is where most people stop. They improve, but they don't fully commit. They understand, but they don't fully apply. They change temporarily, but they don't transform permanently. You are not stopping there. You are taking this all the way. If this audiobook is bringing you value so far, take a moment to like it. Share it with someone who needs to hear this. Leave a comment with your biggest takeaway. And subscribe to Prime Audiobooks for more content like this. Now let's continue. Let's bring everything together. You have energy that most people try to suppress. You have a mind that processes faster than most. You have an awareness that picks up details others miss. You have a natural sensitivity to pressure that forces you to prepare. And now you have the structure, discipline, and identity to direct all of it. That combination is rare, and when used correctly, it becomes unstoppable. But it only works if you keep using it. This is not something you turn on and off. This is how you live. You wake up and direct your energy. You face your tasks and structure your thinking. You step into pressure and execute with precision. You follow through with discipline. You reinforce your identity through your actions. Every single day, not perfectly, but consistently, because consistency is what turns potential into results, and results into reality. There will always be people who avoid discomfort. There will always be people who wait for clarity. There will always be people who hesitate. You are no longer one of them. You move when it matters. You act when it counts. You perform when it's difficult. That is your edge. And as you continue forward, remember this clearly. You were never held back because you felt too much. You were held back because you didn't know how to use what you felt. Now you do. So the only question left is whether you will apply it, not once, not when it's easy, but consistently, especially when it's hard, because that is where everything changes. That is where your growth becomes undeniable. That is where your results separate you. And that is where you prove not to anyone else but to yourself what you are capable of. So as you step into whatever comes next, let this stay with you. When the pressure rises, will you shrink or will you sharpen? When your mind speeds up, will you scatter or will you direct it? When discomfort appears, will you avoid it or will you use it? And most importantly, who are you choosing to be when it matters the most? Because the answer to those questions is not something you say. It's something you demonstrate again and again until there is no doubt left. Until your actions speak louder than any thought. Until your identity is no longer something you question but something you live. And when you reach that point, you won't just manage anxiety. You will have turned it into one of your greatest strengths. And that is where you become unstoppable.